Single mom Jasmine Wallace thought the dilapidated fire station she bought for $500 at a city auction was just a desperate attempt to give her daughter somewhere safe to sleep. But when severe basement flooding revealed a sealed wall behind old lockers, Jasmine discovered something impossible: a concealed vault containing bearer bonds worth $200 million. Classified files proving a missing Treasury heist from 1984 had been covered up by corrupt officials, and the terrifying realization that her late husband's accidental death 3 years earlier was connected to his investigation of the same conspiracy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The basement of Westlake City Hall smelled like broken dreams. An industrial cleaner that couldn't quite mask the stench of decades of municipal neglect. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the irregular rhythm of electrical systems pushed beyond their intended lifespan, casting harsh shadows across rows of metal folding chairs that had witnessed more human disappointment than most therapists. Offices. The air was thick with the collective anxiety of people who had nothing left to lose, each clutching whatever crumpled bills they'd managed to scrape together from emergency funds, side hustles, and the kind of last resort loans that destroyed credit scores. Jasmine Wallace sat in the back row like a refugee in her own country, her 7-year-old daughter Lily sleeping against her shoulder with the exhausted resignation of a child who'd learned that adult promises were as fragile as the stability they pretended to provide. Both wore clothes that told the story of their descent from middle-class comfort to working poor. Desperation faded jeans with patches that Jasmine had sewn by hand, sneakers held together with duct tape and stubborn hope, and jackets that had been purchased during better times when she'd believed that her nursing degree guaranteed security in America. The uniform she'd worn to her double shift at Memorial Hospital still clung to her skin, saturated with antiseptic and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came after months of sleeping 3 hours between jobs. Her hospital ID, a plastic rectangle that read Jasmine Wallace, RN in faded letters, had become a badge of shame rather than pride, a constant reminder that her 12 years of dedicated service couldn't protect her family against the reality of medical bankruptcy and insurance companies that specialized in finding reasons to deny claims. Max, their 2-year-old Australian Shepherd mix, rescued from the animal shelter just days before his scheduled euthanasia, lay at their feet with an alertness that seemed inappropriate for their dire circumstances. The dog was a genetic lottery. Ticket part Australian Shepherd intelligence, part Border Collie precision, part something smaller that gave him oversized ears and expressive amber eyes that tracked movement with uncanny awareness. His black and white coat was patchy from stress during his months at the crowded shelter, but his spirit remained unbroken despite everything life had thrown at him, much like the woman who'd saved him from death row with her last discretionary $20. The rescue had been Lily's idea, implemented during one of those desperate middle-of-the-night conversations when a 7-year-old tried to solve adult problems with the pure logic that came before the world taught her that fairness was a luxury rather than a guaranteed right. "Mom, he needs us as much as we need him," she'd whispered while they sat in their car outside the shelter eating ramen cooked on a camping stove, trying to pretend that living in a vehicle was an adventure rather than a failure of the American dream. But Max had proven to be more than just emotional support for a traumatized child. The dog possessed an uncanny ability to sense trouble before it manifested in ways that human perception could detect, growling low in his throat when suspicious vehicles lingered too long in parking lots, positioning himself protectively when strangers approached with intentions that seemed friendly on the surface but carried undercurrents of threat or manipulation. His behavior suggested experiences during his shelter months that had taught him to read danger in subtle environmental cues that most animals never learn to recognize. "Lot 47, announced city auctioneer Vincent Thornton, whose gravelly voice carried the mechanical cadence of a man who'd spent 27 years selling other people's disasters to the highest bidder. His weathered face showed the kind of professional detachment that came from witnessing human desperation as a daily routine, treating family tragedies like livestock auctions where sentiment was a luxury that serious buyers couldn't afford. The auction had been grinding through foreclosures and tax delinquencies for 4 hours, each lot representing someone's collapsed dreams: a grandmother's house lost to medical bills, a young family starter home sacrificed to unemployment, a small business owner's commercial property seized by the city for back taxes that accumulated faster than revenue during the economic downturn that politicians claimed had ended years ago. Abandoned fire station on Riverside Drive, approximately 0.8 acres of urban property. Structure condemned by city engineering department due to roof damage, plumbing issues, and electrical hazards. Thornton continued, reading from a tablet. That made the property sound like a death trap rather than potential shelter. No utilities currently connected. Buyer assumes all responsibility for cleanup, renovation, and compliance with municipal building codes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The City Hall basement fell silent, except for the electrical hum of fluorescent ballasts and the distant rumble of traffic carrying people to places where they belonged, where they had addresses and mailboxes and neighbors who knew their names. The property description had effectively eliminated any interest from buyers who possessed common sense or adequate financial resources to pursue better alternatives. Jasmine felt her heart hammering against her ribcage as she calculated the mathematics of desperation. Her checking account contained exactly $543 money that should have been allocated to Lily's winter clothes and groceries that might last until her next paycheck arrived. But their current situation was a countdown to complete homelessness, with the seasonal shelter closing in 2 weeks and temperatures already dropping into the dangerous range for sleeping in their 10-year-old Honda Civic. The abandoned fire station represented something more valuable than money could measure: the possibility of shelter that nobody could take away from them, regardless of their ability to make monthly payments to landlords who treated human habitation as profit margins rather than basic human dignity. Even a condemned structure offered more security than sleeping in their car through a Midwest winter, where temperatures regularly dropped below zero and emergency shelters operated at capacity with waiting lists longer than the coldest months. The station's brick construction meant it would at least block wind and hold some heat, even with a damaged roof. And unlike a traditional house, a fire station would have multiple large rooms where they could close off damaged sections while making others livable. "Do I have an opening bid?" Thornton asked, scanning the sparse crowd with eyes that had seen every variation of human desperation during his decades of professional experience. "The minimum bid is $250 to cover administrative costs and city fees." The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, filled with the weight of collective poverty and the understanding that even $250 represented a significant financial risk for most of the people remaining in the City Hall basement. These were not investors or speculators. They were survivors clinging to the edges of economic disaster, people who understood that sometimes the difference between shelter and exposure was measured in single-dollar bills rather than thousands. Max suddenly lifted his head from the concrete floor, his attention focused on something beyond the basement windows that faced west toward the river. His ears pricked forward with the intensity that Jasmine had learned to recognize as significant, rather than random, his nostrils flaring as if catching a scent that carried information more complex than simple animal awareness could process. The dog's entire body seemed to vibrate with recognition, as though the auction lot description had triggered memories or instincts that connected to experiences from his mysterious past. Jasmine raised her trembling hand with the desperate courage of someone who understood that this moment might determine whether her daughter spent the winter in a car or under an actual roof, regardless of its condition. $500, she called out, her voice barely audible above her own thundering heartbeat and the mechanical hum of City Hall ventilation systems that struggled to circulate air through basement windows that hadn't been opened since the building's renovation in the 1970s. The bid amount represented nearly all of her available resources, money that should have been preserved for emergencies or basic necessities like food and medicine. But their current trajectory led inexorably toward a health crisis with winter approaching and no stable housing in sight. The city's rental market required deposits and credit scores that excluded people whose lives had been derailed by medical bankruptcy, regardless of their education or work history. Going once for $500, Thornton announced with the professional indifference of someone who'd witnessed thousands of these transactions without developing emotional investment in their outcomes. City records would later show that the fire station at 1726 Riverside Drive had been abandoned since 2005, when the department consolidated operations into newer facilities across town. Property taxes had remained unpaid for 15 consecutive years, and its legal history included multiple structural condemnation notices, alongside a peculiar designation as historically significant that prevented demolition despite its deteriorating condition. Previous attempts to auction the property had failed due to lack of interest and complications involving environmental concerns that suggested issues beyond simple building code violations. Going twice, Thornton continued, allowing sufficient time for competition that never emerged from an audience that understood the difference between desperation and stupidity, between taking calculated risks and accepting obvious disasters disguised as bargain opportunities. Lily stirred against Jasmine's shoulder, awakening with the intuitive awareness that children developed when their security depended entirely on adult decisions that could transform their lives in ways beyond their control or understanding. "Mommy, what's happening?" she whispered, her voice carrying the kind of mature concern that 7-year-olds shouldn't need to develop, but often acquired when family stability became conditional on external circumstances beyond anyone's control. "We might have found a new home, sweetheart," Jasmine replied, though her voice carried more hope than confidence, more desperation than certainty. The fire station purchase represented a leap of faith into unknown territory, literally and figuratively, with consequences that could range from salvation to disaster, depending on factors they wouldn't discover until they actually reached the property and assessed its real condition versus the legal descriptions that typically emphasized problems while minimizing possibilities. "Sold to bidder number 83 for $500, Thornton announced, bringing his gavel down with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence that would determine the direction of lives that had already endured more uncertainty than most people experienced in entire lifetimes. As Jasmine signed paperwork that transferred ownership of property she'd never seen to her name, Max pressed against her legs with unusual intensity. The dog's behavior suggested knowledge or recognition that transcended normal animal responses to human stress, as though the property address triggered associations that connected to experiences from his shelter months or before, a history that remained as mysterious as their future prospects. The deed transfer process required 38 minutes of bureaucratic procedures designed to protect the city from liability while ensuring that new property owners understood their complete responsibility for whatever disasters they'd purchased. Jasmine's signature appeared on documents that absolved the government of responsibility for structural integrity, environmental hazards, access difficulties, or any other problems that might transform their bargain purchase into an expensive mistake that could consume whatever limited resources they'd managed to preserve. Property located at 1726 Riverside Drive, 2 blocks east of Mason Street Bridge, explained City Clerk Denise Morales, whose voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who'd processed thousands of these transactions without developing personal investment in their outcomes. No utilities currently connected, no recent structural inspections. Buyer assumes all responsibility for compliance with local building codes and environmental regulations. The legal language was designed to discourage rather than inform, emphasizing potential problems, while avoiding any suggestion that the property might offer solutions to a housing crisis or opportunities for creative problem-solving by people whose circumstances had taught them to find value in situations that others automatically dismissed as worthless. Outside City Hall, the October afternoon air carried the sharp bite of approaching winter, with temperatures that reminded everyone within the metropolitan area that comfortable weather was a temporary luxury that would soon be replaced by conditions that tested human endurance and revealed the difference between adequate shelter and potentially fatal exposure. The Wallace's 2013 Honda Civic looked pathetic beside the SUVs and luxury sedans that belonged to people who attended auctions for investment purposes rather than survival vehicles that suggested owners with sufficient resources to handle unexpected problems and comfortable homes to return to when their bargain hunting expeditions concluded successfully or unsuccessfully. The Civic's passenger door required a specific combination of lifting and slamming to engage properly. Its exhaust system rattled with expensive-sounding problems that she couldn't afford to repair, and its heating system produced more noise than warmth through vents that hadn't been cleaned since she'd purchased the car 4 years ago with money that seemed abundant compared to her current circumstances. But Max bounded into the back seat with enthusiasm that seemed entirely inappropriate for their precarious situation, his tail wagging as Lily giggled and wrapped her arms around his neck with the kind of pure joy that children could still access. Despite understanding that their lives had become unpredictable and potentially dangerous. For the first time in months, Jasmine heard her daughter laugh with genuine happiness rather than the forced cheerfulness that had become her default response to adult anxiety and uncertainty. The simple sound contained more value than any property, deed, or financial asset proof that children's resilience could sometimes overcome the harshest circumstances, at least momentarily. The Civic's engine turned over on the second attempt, coughing to life with mechanical complaints that suggested expensive repairs in the near future but sufficient functionality to complete whatever journey lay ahead of them to a fire station that would test both the vehicle's capabilities and their own reserves of courage and determination. Jasmine had learned to interpret automotive sounds as diagnostic information, developing mechanical intuition born from necessity and the understanding that professional repairs were luxuries that people in their circumstances couldn't afford. The subtle changes in engine pitch and vibration told her they had perhaps 2 months before something critical would fail, hopefully enough time to make at least part of the fire station habitable. As they drove west through the city's commercial district, passing businesses that had thrived during better economic times, but now displayed for lease signs with depressing frequency, Jasmine couldn't ignore Max's behavior in the rearview mirror. The dog had positioned himself where he could see through the rear window, but his attention was focused forward toward their destination rather than backward toward the life they were leaving behind. His posture suggested anticipation rather than anxiety, recognition rather than random animal excitement, as though they were finally traveling toward something he'd been searching for during his months in the shelter. System, a purpose or meaning that transcended simple survival. The intensity of his focus made Jasmine wonder about his history before the animal shelter, about experiences that might have prepared him for whatever awaited them at 1726 Riverside Drive. The route to Riverside Drive took them through neighborhoods that tracked the city's economic decline from prosperous to precarious, past once thriving community centers now boarded up, and alongside parks where homeless encampments had replaced children's playgrounds, visible evidence of systems that had failed the very people they were designed to protect. But Riverside Drive itself revealed the odd patchwork of urban renewal that characterized cities throughout the Midwest blocks of neglect, interrupted by pockets of gentrification where developers had transformed abandoned industrial spaces into luxury condominiums that remained half-empty despite reduced asking prices and creative financing options. The abandoned fire station appeared suddenly between a renovated warehouse that now housed an artisanal coffee roastery and a vacant lot where urban gardeners had established raised beds that produced vegetables for community food banks and local restaurants. The contrast was jarring evidence of both neglect and possibility existing side by side along the same street. Station 17, as identified by faded lettering above massive vehicle bay doors, had clearly been designed during an era when municipal architecture aspired to more than mere functionality. The two-story brick structure featured arched windows, decorative cornices, and the kind of solid construction that belonged to a time when public buildings were expected to last for generations, rather than budget cycles. Despite obvious roof damage and boarded windows on the second floor, the station retained a dignity that spoke of its former importance to the community. It had served a reminder that this building had once housed people who risked their lives daily to protect others, who understood that service sometimes required sacrifice, and that community meant more than just geographical proximity. The civic suspension complained about potholes in the station's concrete apron as Jasmine parked as close as possible to the pedestrian entrance beside the larger vehicle bays. The building looked simultaneously better and worse than the auction description had suggested, better in its fundamental construction and architectural features, worse in the obvious water damage and structural issues that would require significant resources to address. "Is this really ours now, Mom?" Lily asked, her voice caught between hope and uncertainty as she peered through the car window at what might become their new home, or might prove to be another disappointment in a series that had taught her to expect the worst while still somehow maintaining the capacity for optimism that allowed children to survive circumstances that broke many adults. "Yes, sweetheart. It's really ours," Jasmine replied, trying to infuse her voice with more confidence than she felt about the massive renovation project that stretched before them. "It's going to need a lot of work, but we'll make it a home together." Max burst from the car the moment Jasmine opened her door, bounding across the concrete with purpose rather than random exploration. Instead of marking territory or investigating smells as most dogs would in a new environment, he ran directly to the pedestrian entrance and began scratching at the metal door with focused intensity, whining with harmonics that suggested urgency rather than simple excitement. The fire station keys were heavy in Jasmine's hand-solid brass that belonged to an era before electronic security systems and proxy cards, their weight a tangible reminder of ownership that felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying. The responsibility of property came with possibilities, but also with challenges that could overwhelm someone already struggling to meet basic needs. As she approached the entrance where Max continued his determined scratching, Jasmine felt something shift in her perspective, a fragile crystallization of hope that had been absent during their months of downward spiral. Perhaps this forgotten building represented not just shelter, but an opportunity to rebuild something that extended beyond physical walls to the kind of security that came from creating one's own solutions rather than depending on systems that had repeatedly proven unreliable. The key turned in the lock with surprising ease, suggesting recent maintenance despite the building's supposed abandonment. The heavy metal doors swung inward to reveal the first chapter of their new beginning. Story that would challenge everything Jasmine thought she understood about chance, purpose, and the unexpected ways that forgotten places sometimes held secrets that could transform lives caught between desperation and possibility. The massive entry hall of Station 17 stretched before them like a forgotten cathedral to public service. Sunlight filtered through grime-covered windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in air that smelled of decades of firefighters' sweat, diesel exhaust, and the peculiar metallic scent of dormant machinery. Despite the building's condemned status, The interior structure appeared remarkably sound, high ceilings supported by exposed steel beams, concrete floors designed to bear the weight of emergency vehicles, and brick walls thick enough to withstand both external forces and internal fires. "It's huge, Mom," Lily exclaimed, her voice echoing through the cavernous space that had once housed fire engines and ambulances. Her words bounced off walls that had absorbed countless alarms, witnessed generations of first responders rushing toward dangers that most people fled, and held the invisible residue of both triumph and tragedy that accompanied emergency services. Max had already abandoned them, racing across the concrete floor with purpose rather than random exploration. Unlike most dogs investigating new territory, he didn't pause to mark boundaries or explore interesting scents. Instead, he ran directly toward a metal door at the rear of the apparatus bay, pawing at it with the kind of focused intensity that suggested knowledge rather than curiosity. "I think he wants us to follow him," Jasmine said, her nursing instincts responding to the dog's unusual behavior. Years of working in emergency medicine had taught her to trust patterns that deviated from normal expectations, subtle indicators that often revealed critical information before conventional diagnostic methods could detect problems. The station's first floor was surprisingly intact despite years of abandonment. The apparatus bay where fire engines had once waited for emergency calls dominated the space, large enough to accommodate multiple vehicles and still leave room for equipment storage and maintenance activities. Adjacent rooms revealed what had once been a kitchen and dining area where firefighters had shared meals during 24-hour shifts, offices where reports had been filed and training conducted, and a common room where personnel had rested between emergencies. Each space told stories about the people who had occupied them: coffee cup rings permanently embedded in countertops, drill schedules still visible on whiteboards that hadn't been erased during the final shift, personal lockers that still contained forgotten items deemed not valuable enough to retrieve when the station closed. These abandoned artifacts created an eerie sense of interrupted lives, as though the building's occupants had departed suddenly, expecting to return to shifts that never materialized. "Mom, look," Lily called from the kitchen area where she'd discovered a wall covered with photographs documenting the station's history. Formal portraits of crews standing beside vehicles that evolved from horse-drawn wagons to modern engines. Action shots of firefighters battling historic blazes throughout the city, and community events where Station 17 personnel had demonstrated equipment or educated children about fire safety. The photographs chronicled nearly a century of service, revealing how the station had been integral to the surrounding neighborhood's development and protection. Among the images, Jasmine noticed several that showed the same building where her late husband, Marcus, had worked as a financial investigator before his accident 3 years earlier, the federal building that housed multiple government agencies, including the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division. The coincidence sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the station's lack of heating. Marcus had died when his car went off River Road during a rainstorm. His body recovered 2 days later after an extensive search. The official investigation had ruled the death accidental, attributed to poor visibility and road conditions. But Marcus had expressed concerns about his safety during the weeks before his death, vague references to something big he'd discovered while investigating financial crimes that reached levels he hadn't expected. Max's urgent barking interrupted her thoughts, pulling her attention back to the present situation. The dog had moved from the metal door to a different section of the apparatus bay, scratching frantically at what appeared to be an access panel in the concrete floor, large metal square with a recessed handle that might lead to maintenance tunnels or storage areas beneath the station. "I think he's found something," Jasmine said, crossing the bay to examine what had captured the dog's attention with such intensity. The access panel was secured with a padlock that showed more recent use than the station's 2005 closure date, would suggest shiny brass that contrasted with the tarnished metal fixtures surrounding it. "Can we open it?" Lily asked, her natural curiosity overriding the caution that their precarious circumstances had taught her over recent months. The child's resilience continued to amaze Jasmine, her ability to maintain wonder and exploration despite experiencing hardships that would have crushed most adults. "We'll need tools," Jasmine replied, examining the padlock more closely. "And before we start breaking into locked areas, we should probably check the rest of the station to see what we're dealing with." The second floor, accessed via a spiral staircase that firefighters had once used for rapid deployment during emergencies, revealed sleeping quarters where personnel had rested between calls, bathroom facilities that would require significant plumbing repairs, and additional office space that might eventually become bedrooms once structural issues were addressed. The roof damage was concentrated in one corner, allowing water infiltration that had damaged ceiling materials and created potential mold issues that would need remediation before the space could be safely inhabited. "Mom, I think we could live here," Lily said, her voice filled with the kind of hope that children could generate even in dire circumstances. She stood in what had once been a dormitory room, large enough to accommodate multiple beds, but intimate enough to feel like a proper bedroom rather than institutional housing. "We could put our beds right here where it's not leaking." Jasmine's nursing training automatically calculated priorities: secure the building against further water damage, identify spaces that could be safely inhabited without extensive repairs, establish basic sanitation and heating before winter temperatures made the structure dangerous. The challenges were enormous, but the square footage and solid construction offered possibilities that far exceeded anything they could have found in conventional housing markets with their limited resources. "We'll start with the first floor," she said, developing a mental triage plan similar to those she'd implemented during hospital emergencies when resources were limited and needs exceeded available staff. "We can section off an area for sleeping and basic living while we work on the rest room by room." As they descended the spiral staircase to continue their exploration, a sudden downpour hammered against the damaged roof, sending water cascading through ceiling breaches and creating instant rivers across the second-floor corridor. The intensity of the rainfall suggested a weather system more severe than seasonal norms, the kind of climate anomaly that had become increasingly common in recent years. "We need to check the basement," Jasmine exclaimed, suddenly remembering the municipal building codes that required emergency drainage systems in public facilities. If the station's drainage systems were compromised or blocked, water accumulation could threaten their entire investment and potentially create dangerous structural conditions. They raced back to the apparatus bay where water had already begun pooling around the access panel that had captured Max's attention earlier. The dog stood ankle-deep in rapidly rising water, barking with increased urgency as though understanding the threat that the flooding posed to their new shelter. "We need to find the main basement entrance," Jasmine said, scanning the apparatus bay for doors that might lead to lower levels. City buildings of this era typically included substantial basement areas for mechanical systems, storage, and sometimes civil defense purposes during the Cold War period. A door marked "Mechanical Room Authorized Personnel Only" revealed a staircase descending into darkness that already showed signs of water infiltration. Flashlight beams from their phones revealed a basement level significantly larger than the footprint of the building, above extending not only beneath the station, but apparently connecting to adjacent structures through archways that had been bricked up during renovations decades earlier. The water level was rising rapidly, already 6 inches deep across the basement floor, and climbing as drainage systems designed for normal rainfall proved inadequate for the deluge hammering the building. Emergency pumps that should have activated automatically had long since failed due to lack of maintenance and power, leaving the basement vulnerable to flooding that could compromise foundation walls and potentially create sinkholes beneath the concrete floor of the apparatus bay. "There's the drainage control panel," Jasmine said, spotting a metal cabinet mounted on the wall beside what appeared to be the main water line entering the building. Her years of hospital work had included emergency management training that covered infrastructure systems essential for facility operations during disasters, knowledge that suddenly seemed providential given their current crisis. The manual override required significant physical effort to engage a rusted wheel valve that had probably not been turned since the station's closure. Jasmine strained against resistance that threatened to defeat her until suddenly the mechanism gave way with a metallic shriek that echoed through the basement like a creature awakening from hibernation. Water began draining immediately as ancient systems designed by engineers who built for longevity rather than planned obsolescence responded to mechanical commands that required no electricity or computerized controls. The simplicity of the engineering gravity-fed drainage channels connected to municipal storm systems demonstrated infrastructure planning that had anticipated disasters rather than merely meeting minimum code requirements. As the water level dropped, revealing basement floors and lower wall sections that had been submerged, Max resumed his focused behavior, running directly to a section of wall partially concealed behind rusted metal shelving units that had once held maintenance supplies and emergency equipment. The dog scratched frantically at the concrete surface, whining with increased urgency that suggested discoveries more significant than simple rodent hunting. "He's found something again," Lily said, joining the dog at what appeared to be an ordinary wall section, indistinguishable from surrounding surfaces except for subtle discoloration patterns that might indicate recent disturbance. Jasmine helped her daughter push aside the heavy metal shelving, revealing a section of wall with mortar lines that differed slightly from surrounding areas, newer material that had been used to seal what might have been an opening connecting to adjacent basements or perhaps utility tunnels that ran beneath older sections of the city. "This doesn't match the original construction," Jasmine observed, her fingers tracing mortar lines that showed different composition and application techniques from the surrounding century-old craftsmanship. This section was sealed off much more recently than the rest of the basement was built. Max's excitement reached fever pitch as Jasmine examined the wall more closely, discovering that what had appeared to be solid construction actually included a concealed Dora section designed to look like permanent wall but incorporating hidden hinges and a disguised locking mechanism that could only be detected through careful physical examination rather than visual inspection. The flooding had weakened the newer mortar surrounding the concealed entrance, causing sections to crumble under pressure and revealing metal fittings that had been deliberately hidden during construction. Whatever lay beyond this sealed entrance had been concealed with expertise that suggested professional construction rather than amateur modification. Institutional-level security measures implemented with resources beyond typical private capabilities. "Should we open it?" Lily asked, her voice betraying both excitement and apprehension about discoveries that might either improve their circumstances or create complications beyond their ability to manage. Her 7-year-old wisdom recognized that some discoveries came with responsibilities or consequences that could prove dangerous despite initial appearances of opportunity. Jasmine hesitated, weighing their immediate needs against potential risks associated with breaching sealed areas in a municipal building. Their legal ownership of the property probably included whatever lay beyond this hidden entrance, but deliberately concealed spaces often contained things that someone had considered important enough to hide from public awareness contents that might range from valuable to hazardous. Max made the decision for them by throwing his body against the weakened section of wall, his 45 pounds of determined canine muscle providing sufficient force to break through mortar compromised by floodwater. The concealed door swung inward with a grinding sound of metal against concrete, revealing a chamber that extended beyond their flashlight beams, a space that appeared significantly different from the utilitarian basement surrounding it. "Stay behind me," Jasmine instructed Lily, her protective instincts automatically calculating risk assessment and safety protocols as they crossed the threshold into an area that defied immediate categorization or explanation. Unlike the rough concrete and exposed utilities of the main basement, this chamber featured finished walls, tiled flooring, and evidence of electrical systems that appeared to have been installed or updated much more recently than the station's 2005 closure date. The space resembled a professional office or secure document storage facility rather than municipal infrastructure, with built-in shelving systems and what appeared to be a sophisticated ventilation system designed to maintain specific environmental conditions. But it was the massive vault door set into the far wall that stopped their exploration completely, a bank-quality security installation that would have required specialized equipment and expertise to install, particularly in a location supposedly abandoned for municipal purposes. The vault door featured a combination dial lock system rather than electronic security, suggesting installation during an era when mechanical systems were considered more reliable than computerized alternatives that could be compromised through technological means. "Mom, what is this place?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible as the implications of their discovery began to register. This wasn't standard municipal infrastructure or forgotten storage. This was a deliberately constructed secure facility hidden beneath a seemingly abandoned fire station, concealed from public awareness and official records with expertise that suggested government-level resources. Max showed no hesitation or concern, bounding directly to the vault door and positioning himself beside the combination dial with the focused attention of an animal who recognized significant objects from previous experience. His behavior suggested familiarity rather than random curiosity, as though he'd been in this space before or had been trained to recognize similar security installations. "I don't know, sweetheart," Jasmine replied honestly, trying to process implications that extended far beyond their immediate housing crisis to questions about why such a facility existed beneath a decommissioned fire station and what connection it might have to her late husband's work with financial crimes investigation. The vault door appeared operational despite years of apparent disuse, its mechanical components preserved by environmental controls that had maintained stable conditions within the hidden chamber. Unlike electronic security systems that would have failed during power outages or required continuous maintenance, the mechanical combination lock remained functional, a deliberate choice that suggested preparation for long-term security without dependence on external systems or services that might be interrupted during emergencies. As Jasmine examined the combination dial more closely, she noticed something that triggered memories from conversations with Marcus during happier times, discussions about security, protocols, and how even the most sophisticated systems often incorporated backup access methods that knowledgeable insiders could utilize during emergencies. The dial featured subtle markings that differed from standard manufacturer patterns, custom modifications that might indicate specialized security protocols. "I wonder," she murmured, fingers tracing the dial circumference until she located a nearly invisible seam that suggested an additional access mechanism concealed within what appeared to be a conventional combination lock. Years of nursing had trained her fingers to detect subtleties that visual inspection might miss, variations in texture, temperature, or resistance that often provided critical diagnostic information when monitoring patients. Applying gentle pressure to the concealed seam while rotating the dial through positions that might correspond to significant numbers, birthdays, anniversaries, or other personally meaningful combinations, Jasmine felt a subtle click that suggested mechanical engagement rather than random movement. The sensation was reminiscent of stories Marcus had shared about security systems, designed to appear conventional while incorporating features that provided access to people who understood their true functionality. The combination that finally triggered the locking mechanism was instantly recognizable: the date they had met, followed by the date of Lily's birth. numerical sequences that Marcus had used for everything from phone passwords to luggage combinations. Despite Jasmine's teasing about his predictability, the familiarity of these numbers in this extraordinary context sent chills through her that had nothing to do with the basement's dampness. The vault door's locking bolts retracted with mechanical precision that spoke of quality, engineering, and regular maintenance despite its concealed location and apparent abandonment. As the massive steel barrier swung open on perfectly balanced hinges revealing the chamber beyond, Jasmine felt a growing certainty that their discovery connected directly to Marcus's work and possibly to the circumstances surrounding his death 3 years earlier. The vault's interior defied immediate comprehension, a space approximately 20 feet square filled with organized documentation that suggested active use far more recent than the fire station's official closure date. Climate control systems hummed quietly, maintaining temperature and humidity levels optimal for document preservation, while emergency lighting activated automatically as the door opened, suggesting power systems independent from municipal utilities. Wall-mounted shelving contained hundreds of labeled files organized by date and subject matter, while a central table held what appeared to be active investigation materials documents, photographs, and handwritten notes arranged in patterns, suggesting ongoing analysis rather than archived information. The organization and presentation resembled the case files Jasmine had glimpsed occasionally when visiting Marcus at his Treasury Department office, the methodical documentation of financial crimes investigation that had been his professional specialty. But it was the floor safe, partially visible beneath the central table, that captured Max's complete attention, a secondary security container that represented another layer of protection beyond the vault itself. The dog positioned himself beside this additional security feature with the focused intensity that suggested recognition rather than random interest, his entire body vibrating with excitement that transcended normal canine behavior. "What is all this?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she tried to process a discovery that exceeded anything a 7-year-old could reasonably be expected to understand. Despite her young age, she recognized that they had found something extraordinary materials that connected to adult concerns far more complex than their immediate housing crisis. "I think this was your dad's," Jasmine replied, recognizing Marcus's distinctive handwriting on nearby documents, the precise lettering that had characterized everything from grocery lists to birthday cards, a forensic accountant's attention to detail that extended into every aspect of his life. "I think he was working here, investigating something important." The revelation that Marcus had maintained a secret office beneath an abandoned fire station challenged everything Jasmine had believed about their marriage and his professional activities. Despite their closeness and apparent transparency, he had concealed significant aspects of his work operations conducted outside official Treasury Department facilities in a location deliberately hidden from public awareness and possibly from his own colleagues and supervisors. As Jasmine began examining documents more closely, the scope and implications of Marcus's investigation became increasingly clear and increasingly alarming. The files detailed what appeared to be a massive financial conspiracy involving municipal bond fraud, tax evasion mechanisms, and money laundering operations that implicated elected officials, financial institutions, and development companies responsible for urban renewal projects throughout the city. The investigation materials suggested that Marcus had discovered systemic corruption connecting city government, financial institutions, and private developers, a criminal network that had diverted millions of dollars from public infrastructure projects into private accounts while creating paper trails that disguised theft as legitimate business operations. The scheme's sophistication indicated professional expertise in financial systems, regulatory frameworks, and law enforcement limitations. But most disturbing were documents suggesting that Marcus had identified the conspiracy's leadership individuals with connections to both political power structures and traditional organized crime networks that had evolved from street-level operations to sophisticated financial manipulation. These individuals possessed resources sufficient to neutralize threats through legal intimidation, career destruction, or when necessary, violence disguised as accidents or random crime. The final document in the active investigation file, dated just 3 days before Marcus's fatal accident, detailed his discovery of bearer bonds financial instruments worth approximately $200 million that had been illegally diverted from municipal development funds and converted to untraceable assets that could be transported, concealed, or transferred without electronic records that might trigger regulatory oversight or law enforcement investigation. "These people killed Dad," Lily said with the devastating clarity that sometimes emerged from children who processed complex information without adult filters or rationalizations. Despite her age, she had intuitively connected the documents surrounding them to the accident that had transformed their lives 3 years earlier, understanding that her father's death had been neither random nor accidental, but deliberate elimination of someone who threatened criminal operations. Before Jasmine could respond to this heartbreaking assessment, Max's behavior escalated from focused attention to active intervention, the dog using his paws and nose to manipulate the floor safe with precision that suggested either previous training or extraordinary problem-solving capabilities. His actions resulted in mechanical engagement that caused the safe's cover to release with an audible click that echoed through the vault, like a final puzzle piece falling into place. The contents revealed by Max's intervention exceeded anything Jasmine could have anticipated. Stacked inside the floor safe were the bearer bonds. Marcus had documented financial instruments representing $200 million in value, concealed in the most secure location he could create outside official channels that he had apparently come to distrust. Accompanying the bonds was a sealed envelope addressed to Jasmine in Marcus's handwriting, apparently prepared in anticipation of circumstances that might prevent direct communication. With trembling hands, Jasmine opened the envelope that connected her across 3 years of separation to the husband whose death had destroyed their financial security and emotional stability. The letter inside reflected Marcus's methodical nature, detailed instructions regarding the bearer bonds, evidence preservation, and contacts within federal law enforcement who operated outside local influence networks that had been compromised by the conspiracy he had uncovered. "I always hoped you would never need to read this," the letter began. "But if you're holding these instructions, it means my investigation has become too dangerous to continue through official channels. What I've discovered connects to corruption beyond anything I imagined when I began this case. Criminal networks that have infiltrated regulatory systems, law enforcement agencies, and financial institutions designed to protect public resources." The letter continued with practical guidance: secure contacts within the FBI's Public Corruption Division and the Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division. Individuals Marcus had identified as trustworthy through years of professional interaction and careful assessment of their responses to previous corruption investigations. These contacts represented potential allies who possessed authority and resources sufficient to protect Jasmine and Lily while pursuing prosecutions against criminal networks that had already demonstrated willingness to commit murder to protect their operations. As Jasmine processed information that transformed their desperate housing situation into something far more complex and potentially dangerous, she realized that their $500 investment in an abandoned fire station had connected them to Marcus's unfinished mission, exposing corruption that had not only claimed his life but continued to damage communities through resource theft disguised as economic development and public service. The bearer bonds represented not only financial security that could transform their immediate circumstances, but also critical evidence in criminal prosecutions that could address systematic corruption that victimized entire communities. Their discovery created both opportunity and responsibility, the chance to secure their future while potentially achieving justice for Marcus and protection for others, threatened by criminal networks that operated beneath the facade of legitimate business and governance. As water continued draining from the basement areas surrounding their extraordinary discovery, Jasmine realized that fate or providence had guided them to exactly the place where they could both address their immediate housing crisis and potentially complete the mission that had cost Marcus his life, revealing corruption that thrived in darkness but might finally face exposure through evidence he had preserved for discovery by those he trusted most. The revelation transformed their desperate gamble on condemned property into something that transcended simple shelter connection to purpose larger than survival and opportunity to transform tragedy into justice that might benefit not only their family but entire communities victimized by corruption that flourished when good people accepted defeat rather than confronting systems designed to exploit vulnerability and suppress accountability. Jasmine stared at the bearer bonds in disbelief, their combined value exceeding anything she could have imagined discovering in an abandoned fire station purchased out of desperation. The $200 million represented not just financial security, but a dangerous connection to the criminal conspiracy that had claimed Marcus's life, physical evidence that powerful people would kill to recover or destroy. "What do we do now, Mom?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady in the vault that had become both sanctuary and danger zone. The question carried weight beyond her years, a child who understood that adult decisions in this moment would determine not just their financial future, but potentially their survival. Max remained vigilant beside them, his body language shifting from excited discovery to protective awareness, positioning himself between the vault entrance and his family as though anticipating threats that might follow their revelation. His military-grade training seemed increasingly evident in behaviors that suggested preparation for security operations rather than simple pet companionship. "We follow your father's instructions," Jasmine replied, studying the letter that provided detailed guidance for exactly these circumstances. Marcus had anticipated the possibility of his death and prepared accordingly, creating not just evidence storage but a comprehensive contingency plan for family protection and justice pursuit. The letter outlined immediate steps. Contact Special Agent Eleanor Reeves at the FBI's Public Corruption Division. Use only the secure communication method described below, not standard phone or email channels. She operates independently from the local field office and reports directly to Washington oversight. Trust no one within local law enforcement or the regional Treasury office. The network has compromised multiple agencies through strategic placement of cooperative personnel. Marcus's instructions continued with operational security protocols that seemed excessive until Jasmine considered the sophistication and resources of the criminal network he had uncovered. People capable of staging a fatal accident for a federal investigator would certainly maintain surveillance on his family and associates after his death. Before making contact, establish secure location different from your current residence, the letter advised. The fire station at 1726 Riverside Drive remains unknown to them. I purchased it through multiple shell companies with untraceable funds to create a safe facility outside official channels. The building is registered to identities that cannot be connected to us through conventional investigation methods. The revelation that Marcus had secretly purchased the fire station years before his death, creating both an investigation base and potential safe house for his family, transformed their understanding of the auction that had seemed like desperate chance rather than destiny. The abandoned municipal property had never truly left Marcus's control. Its sale through tax auction, representing the final phase of a contingency plan designed to reunite his family with both security resources and evidence necessary for justice. "He knew we'd find this place," Jasmine whispered, piecing together the extraordinary foresight and planning Marcus had implemented before his death. "He arranged everything so we'd eventually end up here when we needed it most." The security Systems within the hidden vault included communication equipment that operated through encrypted channels outside conventional networks technology that appeared military-grade rather than consumer-level, suggesting connections to resources beyond standard Treasury Department operations. Marcus had apparently maintained relationships with allies who provided capabilities exceeding official authorization, people who understood that some threats required extraordinary measures outside bureaucratic limitations. Following the communication protocols detailed in Marcus's letter, Jasmine established contact with Special Agent Reeves through secure channels that bypassed local FBI infrastructure. The response came within minutes, confirmation codes that verified both identity and operational status, followed by instructions for immediate evidence preservation and family security measures. Maintain your position, Agent Reeves directed. Through the encrypted channel, tactical team en route with full authorization under federal jurisdiction. Estimated arrival 19 minutes. Preserve all documentation exactly as discovered. Touch nothing further until team arrives. The rapid response suggested that Reeves had maintained active monitoring of triggers Marcus had established before. His death alert systems designed to activate when his family discovered the evidence he had preserved. The sophisticated preparation reinforced Jasmine's growing understanding that her husband's investigation had extended far beyond routine. Financial crimes to conspiracy that threatened national security and democratic governance. As they waited for federal reinforcement, Jasmine examined documentation that revealed the full scope of what Marcus had uncovered. Systematic corruption that connected seemingly legitimate development projects throughout the city to money laundering. Operations for international criminal organizations. The conspiracy used municipal bonds and infrastructure, contracts to transform illegal proceeds into apparently legitimate assets while simultaneously extracting public resources for private gain. The operation's sophistication explained why Marcus had pursued investigation outside official channels. The conspiracy had placed cooperative personnel throughout regulatory systems and law enforcement agencies, creating surveillance networks that could identify threats through normal information flows and procedural patterns. By establishing a parallel investigation facility with independent resources, Marcus had temporarily avoided detection by criminal networks accustomed to monitoring official channels. Max suddenly tensed beside them, his attention shifting toward the vault entrance with the focused intensity that preceded threat response. His ears flattened against his skull as low growl rumbled from his chest, warning rather than aggression. Alert rather than attack. The dog's behavior suggested approaching personnel who triggered recognition patterns associated with potential danger. Someone's coming, Jasmine whispered, pulling Lily behind the central table while reaching for Marcus's letter that included tactical guidance for exactly these circumstances. The document directed them to a concealed cabinet beneath apparently ordinary shelving, a hidden compartment containing equipment that no civilian should legally possess. The cached resources included body armor size for both adult and child, specialized communication devices with frequency hopping capabilities to prevent signal interception, and defensive equipment that suggested preparation for worst-case scenarios rather than routine security concerns. Marcus had anticipated that his family might face confrontation with professional operators rather than conventional criminals, people with military or law enforcement training who operated with institutional resources and tactical precision. Heavy footsteps approached the vault entrance, multiple personnel moving with coordinated precision that suggested professional training rather than casual exploration. Their movements lacked the tentative patterns of legitimate emergency responders entering unknown territory, instead displaying the confident progression of operators who knew exactly what they were seeking and where to find it. "Federal agents," announced a voice that carried command authority but also subtle discrepancies that triggered Jasmine's warning instincts. The pronunciation and cadence differed from protocol patterns Marcus had sometimes practiced at home, linguistic markers that distinguished authentic federal operations from imitation, attempts by people familiar with but not trained in official procedures. Max's response confirmed her suspicions, the dog's protective stance intensifying rather than relaxing at the federal identification. His training had apparently included authentication protocols that allowed distinction between legitimate authority and deceptive claims, behavioral discrimination that exceeded typical canine capabilities. "Breach in 30 seconds, communicated a different voice, barely audible through the vault's substantial construction, but detectable through specialized acoustic equipment Marcus had installed to monitor external approach corridors. The terminology and operational tempo suggested either law enforcement or military background professional capabilities rather than criminal improvisation. The security contingencies Marcus had prepared included an escape route hidden behind apparent structural support, a passage concealed within engineering elements that would appear solid to visual inspection, but actually contained emergency evacuation capability designed for exactly these circumstances. The tunnel extended beyond the fire station's basement perimeter, connecting to municipal drainage systems that could provide covered movement to emergence points scattered throughout the surrounding area. "Remember your promise to me," Marcus had written in his letter, anticipating circumstances where Jasmine might need to choose between evidence preservation and family safety. "Nothing, not justice, not wealth, not even my memory matters more than keeping Lily safe. If threatened, abandon everything except each other. Assets can be recovered, evidence rebuilt, but family is irreplaceable." The approaching personnel began systematic breach procedures against the vault door, specialized equipment audible through security monitoring systems as they prepared entry techniques designed for hardened structures. Their operational discipline suggested either federal tactical units or private contractors with advanced training and equipment capabilities that exceeded conventional law enforcement or criminal organizations. "This way," Jasmine whispered to Lily, activating the concealed evacuation route according to Marcus's detailed instructions. The structural panel swung inward silently, revealing a passage sized for rapid movement rather than comfortable transit. Emergency system designed for escape rather than regular access. Max positioned himself as rear security, his training manifesting in tactical behaviors that suggested preparation for delaying actions that would protect family evacuation while maintaining maximum operational effectiveness. The dog's discipline and purpose revealed training far beyond conventional service animals or even police canine units, capabilities that suggested specialized preparation by handlers with access to military-grade programs. "Take this," Jasmine instructed Lily, securing a small waterproof container around her daughter's neck, a specialized storage device containing microfilmed copies of key evidence and access codes for secure accounts Marcus had established outside conventional banking systems. The redundant documentation ensured that even if the original evidence was lost or destroyed, sufficient information would survive to pursue justice and access resources necessary for family security. The evacuation passage extended approximately 200 yards beyond the fire station perimeter, connecting to larger drainage infrastructure that offered multiple exit options, depending on surface conditions and potential pursuit patterns. Marcus had mapped the entire system with precision that suggested professional survey capabilities rather than amateur exploration, knowledge of underground infrastructure that typically remained restricted to municipal engineering departments and specialized security agencies. As they moved through the narrow passage, guided by luminescent markers that required no power source, but provided directional guidance visible only to properly equipped personnel, Jasmine heard the muffled sound of the vault breach behind them, specialized charges designed to overcome security systems without causing structural collapse that might damage contents. The controlled application of force suggested professional operators with specific objectives, rather than destructive intent recovery rather than elimination. Max followed behind them, maintaining rear security with the disciplined focus of an animal trained for combat operations rather than civilian protection. His movements suggested tactical awareness beyond instinctive behavior, positioning that maximized both protective capability and personal survival probability. Balancing mission requirements against operational limitations, the drainage system expanded into a junction chamber approximately 10 feet in diameter with multiple outlet options, leading toward different surface emergence points. Marcus's evacuation plan included decision matrices based on time of day, weather conditions and potential pursuit capabilities, contingency planning that considered variables ranging from satellite surveillance to thermal imaging systems. Selecting the outlet path that offered maximum concealment under current conditions, Jasmine led Lily through concrete tunnels that gradually transitioned from municipal infrastructure to what appeared to be much older construction stonework, dating to the city's earliest development periods when underground systems were built with craftsmanship and materials intended to last centuries rather than budget cycles. "Where are we going?" Lily whispered, her voice steady despite circumstances that would have terrified most adults. The child's resilience continued to manifest in capability, rather than collapse adaptation, rather than surrender to circumstances beyond her understanding or control. "To meet your father's friend," Jasmine replied, following navigation markers that directed them toward an emergence point near a transportation hub, where they could blend with commuter patterns while transitioning to the secure location Agent Reeves had designated through encrypted communication channels. The emergence point revealed engineering sophistication beyond conventional infrastructure. Design a concealed exit integrated into older building foundations that predated modern construction records, accessible only through sequential activation of mechanisms that appeared to be architectural elements rather than security systems. The design suggested preparation by people with access to both historical documentation and specialized construction capabilities unavailable to conventional contractors. They emerged into the maintenance area beneath a transportation center, where commuter trains connected suburban communities to the city's commercial districts. The location offered optimal transition conditions, high personnel volume for concealment, multiple departure options for unpredictable movement patterns, and public surveillance systems that created visibility barriers for pursuers operating outside official channels. Max continued demonstrating training beyond conventional service animals automatically, adopting behavioral patterns that suggested ordinary companion status rather than security capability, transforming from tactical asset to apparent pet through subtle adjustments to posture, movement, and attention patterns. The transition revealed specialized preparation for urban operations requiring concealment of actual capabilities beneath civilian appearance. Agent Reeves's tactical team was waiting exactly where her instructions had indicated personnel distinguishable through recognition signals. Marcus had documented rather than obvious federal identification that might trigger surveillance detection by hostile observation assets. Their operational discipline manifested in dispersed positioning that maintained both tactical effectiveness and civilian appearance. Professionals capable of transitioning instantly from apparent normalcy to coordinated action if threats materialized. "Mrs. Wallace," acknowledged the team leader, a woman whose appearance suggested administrative profession rather than tactical capability. Deliberate presentation designed to avoid triggering pattern recognition systems that criminal networks maintained in transportation centers and other public infrastructure. "Your husband's contingency planning was exceptional. Please follow standard civilian movement patterns while maintaining proximity to our personnel." The tactical extraction proceeded through public areas using ordinary civilian transportation. Procedures designed to defeat surveillance systems that monitored for unusual movement patterns or security formations that might indicate high-value targets. Instead of armored vehicles or obvious security details, they utilized public transportation and commercial services, indistinguishable from thousands of similar movements occurring simultaneously throughout the transportation network. During transit to the secure location, Agent Reeves established direct communication through encrypted channels, providing operational context that transformed Jasmine's understanding of Marcus's investigation and its significance beyond conventional financial crimes prosecution. Your husband uncovered something far larger than municipal corruption, Reeves explained, her voice carrying the controlled precision of someone accustomed to operational security requirements, even in secure communications. The network he identified connects local development fraud to international money laundering operations, supporting activities that threaten national security financial infrastructure, enabling everything from terrorism financing to foreign intelligence operations on American soil. The revelation explained why Marcus had implemented security measures that exceeded normal Treasury Department operations. He had discovered that apparently routine financial crimes actually connected to threats, typically addressed by intelligence agencies rather than regulatory enforcement. The conspiracy transcended conventional criminal motivation, incorporating strategic objectives that threatened democratic institutions rather than merely extracting profit. We've been building on his investigation for 3 years, Reeves continued, revealing that Marcus's work had continued despite his death parallel operations, conducted through compartmentalized programs invisible to potentially compromised agencies and personnel. The evidence you discovered completes documentation chains necessary for prosecution of network leadership rather than merely peripheral operators' accountability that reaches people normally insulated from legal consequences by position and resources. The secure facility where they arrived demonstrated capabilities beyond conventional law enforcement resources. A converted industrial building whose exterior suggested ordinary commercial operations, while interior spaces contained advanced security systems and operational support infrastructure, typically associated with intelligence agencies rather than police organizations. The discrepancy revealed operational realities that Marcus had apparently understood before his death. Some threats required response capabilities outside normal jurisdictional limitations and bureaucratic constraints. Your husband established dead man protocols before his death, Reeves explained as technical personnel began processing the evidence Jasmine had preserved according to Marcus's instructions. If he failed to perform specific verification actions at designated intervals, automated systems would initiate progressive information release to trusted contacts operating outside conventional channels, people positioned to continue his work. Without triggering surveillance detection systems the criminal network had established within official agencies. The operational sophistication explained how investigation had continued despite Marcus's death and the network's apparent success in eliminating a key investigator, rather than trusting institutional protections that had proven vulnerable to corruption. Marcus had implemented parallel security systems based on personal relationships and compartmentalized information distribution protocols that prevented any single compromise from destroying the entire operation. As technical teams extracted and authenticated the bearer bonds and supporting documentation, Reeves provided context that transformed Jasmine's understanding of her husband's final actions and the legacy he had created through preparation that extended beyond his death. The fire station purchase wasn't just about creating a secure facility, Reeves explained, revealing operational dimensions that extended beyond evidence preservation to family protection and resource security. Marcus knew that if something happened to him, conventional financial systems might become inaccessible to you through legal manipulation or account freezes disguised as regulatory actions. The bearer bonds represent assets that can't be electronically tracked or legally seized, financial security beyond institutional control. The revelation that Marcus had converted substantial resources to bearer bonds, specifically to protect family financial security in case of his death, preparing for circumstances where powerful adversaries might weaponize financial systems against. His survivors demonstrated foresight and love that transcended conventional estate planning. He had anticipated threats most people would never consider and implemented countermeasures that preserved both justice possibilities and family security despite his absence. His most important protection wasn't the bonds or the evidence, Reeves continued, observing Max's continued vigilance and disciplined behavior that revealed training far beyond conventional service animals. The dog represents specialized capability developed through programs, typically restricted to military special operations and intelligence services, a guardian with training that exceeds most human security personnel in specific threat detection and response scenarios. Max's extraordinary capabilities suddenly made sense, his behavior patterns suggesting operational experience and specialized training rather than merely exceptional animal intelligence or loyal companionship. The dog represented Marcus's determination to provide protection that would remain effective even after his death, a guardian whose capabilities would remain invisible to adversaries accustomed to evaluating human security measures rather than canine operational assets. "He arranged everything," Jasmine whispered, finally understanding the extraordinary preparation and foresight Marcus had implemented before his death. The fire station, the evidence vault, Max's training, the bearer bonds, a complete contingency plan activated by circumstances he hoped would never occur, but prepared for anyway. The technical team completed initial evidence processing, confirming authenticity of both the bearer bonds and supporting documentation that connected apparently legitimate development projects throughout the city to international money laundering operations. The evidence chain Marcus had preserved provided legally actionable connections between local corruption and national security threats, documentation sufficient for prosecution of individuals normally protected by position, resources, and political connections. "We're implementing the final phase of your husband's contingency plan," Reeves explained as specialized personnel prepared simultaneous enforcement actions against multiple targets identified through Marcus's investigation and subsequent operations conducted during the 3 years since his death. Synchronized arrests across 16 jurisdictions will dismantle the network's operational leadership before they can implement destruction protocols or escape contingencies. The operational scale revealed investigation scope far beyond conventional law enforcement capabilities, coordination across multiple federal agencies and international partners, targeting a criminal network that had operated with impunity for decades by exploiting jurisdictional limitations and agency compartmentalization. Marcus's work had created the foundation for accountability that transcended normal constraints, that protected powerful criminals from consequences proportional to their actions. "Your husband died because he refused to surrender to a system designed to protect criminals rather than serve justice," Reeves said, her professional detachment momentarily yielding to genuine respect for a colleague whose sacrifice had enabled operations that institutional limitations would otherwise have prevented. He understood that sometimes protecting what matters requires operating outside systems that have been compromised by the very forces they were designed to control. As enforcement operations commenced against targets Marcus had identified years earlier, Jasmine realized that their desperate $500 purchase of an apparently abandoned fire station had actually represented the activation of contingency plans. Years in development, the final phase of protection and justice, mechanisms her husband had established before confronting forces powerful enough to arrange his death, but not capable of defeating his determination to protect both family and community. Despite his absence, the bearer bonds provided financial security beyond anything Jasmine could have imagined when attending the property auction out of desperation. But the true legacy Marcus had created transcended mere wealth. He had demonstrated that individual courage and integrity could overcome even sophisticated corruption when supported by careful planning, trusted allies, and determination that extended beyond personal survival to protection of principles and people that represented genuine value, rather than merely institutional loyalty or professional advancement. As Lily watched specialized teams coordinating enforcement operations against the criminal network responsible for her father's death, she displayed the resilience and comprehension that had characterized her response throughout their extraordinary journey from desperation to discovery. "Dad knew we'd need help finding our way," she observed with wisdom beyond her years. "So he left maps and guides and treasures where only we could find them." The simple assessment captured the essence of Marcus's extraordinary preparation, not merely physical resources and evidence preservation, but guidance that remained effective despite his absence, protection that continued despite his death, and justice mechanisms that operated despite institutional failures and corrupted systems, designed to prevent accountability for powerful criminals. As federal teams secured the fire station and recovered remaining evidence from the hidden vault, Jasmine realized that their desperate housing solution had actually represented homecoming rather than merely shelter, acquisition, return to protection. Marcus had prepared before his death an activation of justice mechanisms he had established to remain effective despite his absence from the battle against corruption he had refused to surrender to, despite understanding the personal cost his integrity might require. The coordinated enforcement operation against the criminal network Marcus had identified represented the largest anti-corruption action in the city's history. Simultaneous arrests across multiple jurisdictions targeting individuals who had operated with impunity for decades through political connections, financial influence, and strategic placement of cooperative personnel throughout regulatory systems and law enforcement agencies. Dawn broke over the city as tactical teams executed arrest warrants against network leadership individuals whose public personas as philanthropists, civic leaders, and financial pioneers had disguised criminal operations that drained public resources while creating infrastructure designed to appear beneficial, while actually facilitating resource extraction and money laundering for international criminal organizations. From the Secure Operations Center where Jasmine and Lily observed the culmination of Marcus's investigation, Agent Reeves provided context that transformed understanding of both the criminal conspiracy and Marcus's extraordinary courage in confronting forces powerful enough to arrange his elimination but not capable of defeating his determination to protect both family and community despite his absence. "The fire station renovation project where your husband's accident occurred was actually the network's primary money laundering mechanism," Reeves explained, displaying documentation Marcus had preserved that connected apparently legitimate construction contracts to financial flows that concealed both origins and destinations of funds moving through municipal projects. He discovered that abandoned emergency service facilities throughout the city were being systematically acquired through shell companies, renovated using inflated contracts that disguised financial transfers, and then sold to institutional investors who never questioned valuation discrepancies or occupancy patterns inconsistent with reported financial performance. The scheme's sophistication explained why conventional oversight systems had failed to detect operations hiding in plain sight criminal activities disguised as urban renewal and public service restoration, exploitation masked as community improvement, and economic development. The conspiracy had weaponized positive social values to protect criminal operations from scrutiny that might otherwise have identified inconsistencies between reported activities and actual outcomes. "Your husband recognized the pattern when examining financial flows supporting terrorism operations overseas," Reeves continued, revealing investigation origins that connected municipal corruption to national security threats typically addressed by intelligence agencies rather than regulatory enforcement. What appeared to be routine financial crimes actually represented infrastructure supporting activities that threatened democratic institutions and public safety at levels beyond conventional law enforcement jurisdiction or capabilities. The revelation explained why Marcus had implemented extraordinary security measures rather than relying on institutional protections that had proven vulnerable to corruption and manipulation. He had recognized that conventional systems designed to ensure accountability had been compromised by the very forces they were intended to control. Institutional capture that transformed protective mechanisms into exploitation tools, serving criminal interests rather than public welfare. As enforcement operations secured evidence at multiple locations simultaneously, technological assets displayed real-time tracking of financial containment actions that prevented resource flight, that typically allowed wealthy criminals to maintain comfortable exile despite legal consequences for their actions. The coordinated response represented capabilities beyond conventional law enforcement, interagency cooperation that transcended jurisdictional limitations and bureaucratic constraints to achieve accountability proportional to crimes that had victimized entire communities rather than merely individual targets. The bearer bonds you discovered represented both evidence and insurance. Reeves explained as specialized financial crimes personnel implemented asset freezes and property seizures against network-controlled resources throughout financial systems worldwide. Your husband converted seized criminal assets to bearer instruments to both document network operations and ensure that, if institutional protections failed, your family would maintain financial security beyond their ability to weaponize regulatory systems against his survivors. The explanation transformed Jasmine's understanding of both the bond's origins and Marcus's extraordinary foresight in creating protection mechanisms that remained effective despite his death. Rather than merely preserving evidence, he had ensured that the very assets used in criminal operations would provide family security if he couldn't personally protect them. Justice and protection intertwined through preparation that anticipated threats most people would never consider. What happens to the bonds now? Lily asked with the direct practicality that children often brought to complex situations, cutting through procedural complexities to fundamental questions that adults sometimes overlooked while focusing on operational details rather than ultimate objectives. Agent Reeves smiled with genuine warmth that momentarily replaced professional detachment. Recognition of both the child's perceptiveness and the legitimate question about resources that rightfully belonged to victims rather than perpetrators of exploitation, masked as public service. Your father's contingency planning included specific legal provisions for asset distribution. Reeves explained, displaying documentation. Marcus had prepared that detailed resource allocation between family security, victim compensation, and community restoration projects addressing damage caused by the criminal network's activities throughout the city. He established legal frameworks ensuring that recovered criminal assets would provide both justice for victims and security for his family if he couldn't personally protect you. The distribution plan demonstrated Marcus's extraordinary moral vision beyond merely investigating financial crimes. Recognition that justice required both accountability for perpetrators and restoration for communities victimized by exploitation disguised as economic development and public service. His planning had anticipated not just criminal prosecution but healing processes necessary for communities damaged by resource extraction, masked as improvement and progress. 20% of recovered assets are legally designated for your family's security, Reeves continued, explaining provisions Marcus had established through legal mechanisms designed to withstand challenges from both criminal networks and potentially compromised regulatory systems. The remaining 80% will fund community restoration projects addressing infrastructure damage, educational programs, and economic development initiatives in neighborhoods most severely impacted by the network's activities. The allocation reflected Marcus's understanding that genuine justice extended Beyond criminal prosecution to healing processes necessary for communities damaged by exploitation, restoration that address not merely physical infrastructure, but social trust and institutional credibility compromised by systemic corruption that had operated beneath facades of public service and civic leadership. As dawn light strengthened across the city, transforming darkness that had concealed criminal operations into illumination that revealed both exploitation patterns and healing possibilities, tactical teams completed evidence recovery operations. At the fire station where Marcus had established both investigation base and family protection resources, the facility represented both beginning and completion, origin point for investigation that had ultimately achieved justice despite institutional failures and corruption that had initially protected criminal networks from accountability. The fire station remains your property, Reeves confirmed as operations transitioned from enforcement to evidence processing and prosecution preparation. Your husband's ownership was legally established through mechanisms designed to withstand challenges from both criminal networks and regulatory systems that might attempt to seize assets connected to investigation activities. The property represented more than merely shelter or financial asset, physical manifestation of Marcus's determination to protect family, despite circumstances that might prevent his personal presence and guidance. The station embodied both practical security and symbolic continuity, connection to protective determination that transcended physical absence to provide both material resources and inspirational example of courage that refused surrender to systems designed to prevent accountability. For powerful criminals, we can really live there? Lily asked, her voice containing both practical housing concerns and deeper questions about connection to father, whose physical presence had been taken from her life, but whose protection continued through preparation that anticipated needs despite circumstances that prevented his personal guidance. Yes, sweetheart, Jasmine confirmed, understanding that the station represented both practical shelter and spiritual connection, physical space where Marcus's protective presence remained tangible despite his absence from their daily lives. Your dad made sure we would have a home no matter what happened to him. Specialized engineering teams had already begun restoration operations at the station, addressing structural issues and infrastructure limitations that had characterized the property's abandoned appearance while preserving security features and historical elements that connected to both operational functionality and community heritage. The renovation represented transformation rather than merely repair, evolution from apparent abandonment to functional sanctuary without sacrificing either protection capabilities or historical connection. Your husband established renovation plans before his death, Reeves explained, displaying architectural drawings and engineering specifications Marcus had prepared that addressed both structural integrity and security considerations without sacrificing livability or comfort. He created design frameworks addressing both practical needs and symbolic representation transformation of abandoned public service facility into family sanctuary that maintained connection to protection mission that characterized both the building's original purpose and his professional commitment. The plans revealed extraordinary attention to detail, living spaces designed specifically for Jasmine and Lily's preferences and needs, security features integrated into architectural elements rather than imposed as obvious additions, and community connection points that maintained privacy without creating isolation that might trigger surveillance attention through obvious security measures that deviated from neighborhood patterns. As enforcement operations transitioned to prosecution preparation and community restoration initiatives, Jasmine realized that their desperate $500 investment in an apparently abandoned fire station had actually represented activation of protection mechanisms years in development, the final phase of contingency planning designed to ensure both family security and justice achievement despite Marcus's physical absence from battles he had initiated against corruption that threatened both individual victims and institutional integrity. 1 month after discovering the bearer bonds and hidden evidence vault, Jasmine stood in what had been the fire station's apparatus bay, now transformed into a combination living space and community resource center where neighborhood residents could access educational programs, financial literacy training, and economic development initiatives funded through recovered criminal assets. The renovation had preserved the building's historical character, while adapting internal spaces to serve both family needs and community restoration mission. This was always his plan, observed Eleanor Reeves, who had transitioned from operational leadership to advisory capacity as criminal prosecutions advanced through judicial systems, designed to ensure accountability proportional to crimes that had victimized entire communities rather than merely individual targets. Not just investigating corruption or protecting his family, but creating connection between personal security and community restoration, recognition that genuine safety requires both individual protection and social healing. The fire station had become both sanctuary and symbol, physical manifestation of protection that transcended individual security to address community needs. Created through exploitation disguised as development and progress, the transformation represented evolution from emergency response facility to restoration center, addressing damage created through systemic corruption that extracted resources while creating facades of improvement that masked exploitation rather than generating authentic community benefits. Lily had transformed one of the station's former equipment rooms into educational space where neighborhood children received tutoring, technological training, and creative arts education through programs funded by recovered criminal assets. The services addressed needs Marcus had identified through investigation that revealed how corruption had systematically diverted resources from educational systems, while creating statistical reports that masked deteriorating outcomes beneath manipulated metrics designed to suggest improvement while concealing actual conditions. He always said that justice without healing isn't enough, Jasmine recalled, watching her daughter guide younger children through literacy activities that addressed capabilities compromised through systematic resource extraction disguised as educational reform and administrative efficiency. He believed that accountability required both consequences for perpetrators and restoration for victims, recognition that genuine improvement requires addressing damage rather than merely punishing those who caused it. Max maintained vigilant protection throughout the station's transformation from abandoned facility to community restoration center, his specialized training manifesting in security protocols that maintained family safety without creating obvious barriers that might compromise connection to neighborhood residents benefiting from programs operated within the renovated structure. The dog represented continuing protection that adapted to evolving circumstances rather than merely implementing predetermined responses, capabilities that anticipated threats while facilitating healing processes necessary for both family recovery and community restoration. 6 months after the enforcement operations that had dismantled the criminal network Marcus had identified, Jasmine stood on the fire station's renovated roof deck, watching sunrise illuminate a city undergoing transformation. Beyond merely physical reconstruction, the coordinated prosecutions had achieved accountability that extended beyond individual criminals to address systemic vulnerabilities that had allowed corruption to flourish beneath facades of civic leadership and economic development. Your husband's investigation created possibilities beyond merely criminal prosecution, observed Reeves, who had joined Jasmine for what had become weekly strategy sessions, addressing both family security and community restoration initiatives. He recognized that genuine improvement requires not just removing corrupt influences, but establishing transparent systems resistant to exploitation, structural changes, rather than merely personnel replacement. The observation captured essential wisdom beyond conventional law enforcement perspectives, recognition that sustainable justice required systemic transformation rather than merely individual accountability. Marcus had documented not just criminal activities, but institutional vulnerabilities that enabled corruption to operate beneath apparently legitimate operations. Analysis that facilitated healing beyond merely punishment. Jasmine had established a foundation using her portion of recovered assets organization, dedicated to transparency initiatives and accountability mechanisms, designed to prevent recurrence of exploitation patterns that had victimized communities through resource extraction, disguised as economic development and public service restoration. The foundation operated from renovated space within the fire station, creating physical connection between family security and community protection that embodied Marcus's vision of justice, extending beyond merely criminal prosecution. I never understood why he was so passionate about financial crimes investigation, Jasmine admitted, recalling conversations where Marcus had tried explaining significance that sometimes seemed abstract compared to more visibly destructive criminal activities. Now I recognize that he saw connections between resource flows and community outcomes, understanding that exploitation disguised as service creates damage extending far beyond merely financial metrics to social trust and institutional credibility essential for functioning society. The insight reflected growth beyond grief toward understanding that transcended personal loss to recognize larger purpose that had motivated Marcus's extraordinary courage in confronting forces powerful enough to arrange his elimination, but not capable of defeating his determination to protect both family and community, despite his absence from battles he had initiated against corruption that threatened both individual victims and institutional integrity. Lily had developed a memorial garden on station grounds, where neighborhood residents could both remember losses and celebrate healing possibilities emerging from restoration initiatives addressing damage created through systemic corruption. The space represented transformation from trauma to growth evolutionary process that acknowledged injury without allowing past damage to prevent future development. The bonds and evidence mattered, but his real legacy was showing that individual courage can overcome even sophisticated corruption when supported by careful planning and determination that extends beyond personal survival. The insight reflected understanding beyond conventional perspectives on either wealth or justice recognition, that genuine value transcended financial metrics to incorporate connections between individual security and community welfare, personal protection and social healing, accountability for past damage and prevention of future exploitation through systems designed for transparency, rather than merely punishment after victimization has occurred. As the fire station continued evolving from emergency response facility to community restoration center, Jasmine recognized that their desperate $500 investment had actually represented activation of vision years in development manifestation of Marcus's extraordinary determination to ensure that even his death would not prevent protection of both family security and community welfare against forces that had believed themselves beyond accountability or consequences proportional to damage they created through exploitation disguised as service and development. The transformation embodied essential wisdom Marcus had demonstrated through both professional commitment and personal sacrifice. Recognition that genuine security requires addressing systemic vulnerabilities rather than merely responding to emergencies created through exploitation and neglect. The station had evolved from facility designed for crisis reaction to center facilitating proactive development and transparent accountability embodiment of protection that anticipated needs, rather than merely responding to damage after occurrence. He showed us that sometimes protecting what matters requires courage beyond conventional boundaries. Jasmine observed, watching neighborhood residents participating in programs designed to develop capabilities compromised through systematic resource extraction disguised as administrative efficiency and economic development, and that genuine security extends beyond physical safety to creating systems that prevent exploitation rather than merely responding to damage after it occurs. The insight reflected growth beyond personal protection toward recognition that sustainable security required addressing community vulnerabilities that created circumstances where individual safety depended on isolation rather than connection. Understanding that genuine welfare emerged from systems designed for transparency and accountability rather than merely barriers and surveillance that separated rather than united. As evening settled across the city, illuminating transformed neighborhoods where restoration initiatives had replaced exploitation operations disguised as development and progress, Jasmine watched transition between daylight activity and nighttime. Security balance between engagement and protection that characterized both the station's design and Marcus's vision of justice, extending beyond merely prosecution toward healing and prevention through transparency rather than merely punishment. "I think he would be proud," Lily said, watching community members departing after days' programs with resources and capabilities exceeding those available before criminal network dismantling had created possibilities for genuine development, rather than merely exploitation disguised as improvement. Not just because bad people got caught, but because good things are growing where they tried to take everything away. The observation captured essential wisdom beyond conventional justice concepts, recognition that genuine restoration required not merely removing harmful influences, but nurturing beneficial developments addressing damage created through systematic exploitation. The transformed station embodied this understanding through spaces designed for both protection and connection, security that facilitated growth rather than merely preventing additional harm. As stars appeared above city, transformed through accountability, mechanisms and restoration initiatives emerging from Marcus's extraordinary courage and preparation, Jasmine recognized that their desperate housing solution had actually represented connection to purpose larger than merely physical shelter, activation of vision, extending beyond personal security toward community restoration and institutional transparency that prevented exploitation disguised as service and development. The fire station had evolved from emergency response facility to manifestation of protection transcending conventional boundaries between personal welfare and community development, embodiment of security concept, recognizing that genuine safety emerges from systems designed for transparency and accountability rather than merely isolation and surveillance. The transformation represented Marcus's essential understanding that protection requires addressing causes rather than merely responding to symptoms, vision extending beyond crisis management toward prevention through systems designed to facilitate welfare rather than merely punish exploitation after damage occurs. As Jasmine prepared evening security protocols that balanced protection with connection rather than isolation, she reflected on journey from desperate auction attendance to manifestation of vision extending beyond conventional boundaries between personal security and community welfare. Their $500 investment had activated protection mechanisms years in development, final phase of contingency planning designed to ensure both family security and justice achievement, despite Marcus's absence from battles he had initiated against corruption that threatened both individual victims and institutional integrity. The transformed station represented manifestation of courage that refused surrender to systems designed to protect criminals rather than serve justice, determination that extended beyond personal survival to create possibilities for both family security and community restoration despite circumstances that prevented direct guidance through physical presence. 10. The station had evolved from facility designed for emergency response toward center facilitating proactive development and accountable governance, embodiment of security concept, recognizing that genuine safety requires addressing causes rather than merely responding to symptoms. As city lights illuminated transformed neighborhoods where restoration initiatives had replaced exploitation operations disguised as development and progress, Jasmine recognized that their journey from desperate housing search to manifestation of justice vision represented more than merely survival against overwhelming odds, embodiment of courage that refused surrender to circumstances, designed to prevent accountability for powerful criminals who believe themselves beyond consequences. Proportional to damage they created through exploitation disguised as service and development. The fire station stood as testimony to determination that extended beyond conventional boundaries between personal security and community welfare, physical manifestation of protection, concept recognizing that genuine safety emerges from transparency and connection rather than merely isolation and surveillance. The transformation represented Marcus's essential understanding that security requires addressing vulnerability causes rather than merely responding to damage symptoms, vision extending beyond crisis, management toward prevention through systems designed to facilitate welfare rather than merely punish exploitation after occurrence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.